Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hello.
We're here to talk about compensatory education and COVID-19, navigating the process for children with disabilities. My name is Nancy Potter. I'm an attorney in our Pittsburgh office, serving students and families all over Pennsylvania, but particularly focused on our western region, from down in the Southwest all the way up to Erie. And I'm so excited to be here with you today with my wonderful colleague, John Goldsborough. I'm going to let him introduce himself and tell you a little bit about the work that he does.
I'm excited to join you too today. I'm John Goldsborough and I'm in the Berwyn office, again, serving pretty much the entire state as well as the state of Delaware in mainly appellate matters in federal court. So I basically handle all of the appeals from the due process hearings that go on, as well as some other things having to do with kind of side litigation. And I'm in the Berwyn office, as I said. And so Nancy and I will be talking today with you about basically the effect of COVID-19 on the students' rights to compensatory education.
And since you're joining us today, you may be joining us on our YouTube channel. If you look below the video, you can click and subscribe to our YouTube channel and see all the other videos and webinars we've posted. You can also find us across social media. We put a lot of great information out on LinkedIn. We also put a lot of great information out on our Facebook page. You can always sign up for our MLO newsletter. Lots of great informative newsletters are put out and articles done by all of our attorneys. I myself, you can find me on Twitter at Pittsburgh Ed Lawyer, PGHED Lawyer, where I try to share as much information as possible about going-ons in education news, both for special education, like we're talking about today, and also Title VI, Title IX, and higher education and early childhood issues. So today we're going to start off by explaining really what is the school district's responsibility with regard to what they're supposed to be providing our students with disabilities. And John's going to start us off with that conversation.
Thanks, Nancy. The school district under federal law has a responsibility to provide every child with a disability with FAPE. That means a free, appropriate public education. And that under the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, public schools are required to provide each child with a disability with FAPE in the least restrictive environment possible, meaning as much as possible, they should be with the other children at no cost, of course, free to the child's parents. And that's a federal entitlement, and that really leads to the whole idea of compensatory education. Because if there's an entitlement, there has to be a remedy when it doesn't happen. And so the way that FAPE is implemented is, in a nutshell, through an IEP, an individualized education program. And that's designed to meet the child's unique needs. And the child has to receive educational benefit. And it also prepares them for further education, employment, independent living to the extent possible. So the IEP is really a contract for the delivery of that entitlement of FAPE. And in 2017, in really the most important United States Supreme Court decision on this, Andrew F., the court said that an IEP or FAPE doesn't mean just a bare minimum. It really has to be reasonably calculated to enable a child to make progress in light of the child's unique circumstances, to meet challenging objectives. And it has to be appropriately ambitious in light of their circumstances. And I want to emphasize here, it's in light of the child's circumstances. It's not in light of any other circumstances, not the district circumstances. That's well established in law. And it's not in light of whether there's, for example, a teacher's strike or unavailability of buses. That's also well established in law. So Here we have a pandemic, it would fall into that same category. It's not the child's circumstances.
Great, so that leads us to our next question. Do school districts have to provide FAPE during a pandemic? And the short answer is yes, yes they do. The right to FAPE doesn't disappear. It didn't take a vacation during the current pandemic. The US Department of Education and the Pennsylvania Department of Education have both expressly recognized that during this pandemic, the right to FAPE has continued at all times. And further, that children with disabilities may have an entitlement to compensatory education for times that they did not receive a FAPE. In many cases, these students may also have received less than a full FAPE even prior to the pandemic. And researchers now recognize that this move to virtual and distance instruction has caused reading and math levels to drop really for all of our students, but particularly for children with disabilities.
Right.
Now, I've just mentioned what compensatory education, and if you're not familiar with compensatory education, John's going to walk us through now. What exactly is compensatory education, John?
Right. So it's really compensation, basically. It's a different kind of remedy. And maybe I should preface this by saying that we keep encountering school districts saying that it's some kind of punitive damages or some sort of punishment to the school district. That's not it at all. When there's a federal entitlement to FAPE, there has to be some remedy, and this is the remedy. It's a compensation fund, an educational fund for a child to further their individualized education program goals and make up for what was lost when the school district did not provide FAPE. It's an equitable remedy, in other words, not a remedy of law. There are lots of different considerations for determining what will be included or how much will be included, and what it can be used for. Some of the considerations here are the duration of the denial of FAPE. So it really has to focus on the educational benefits that would have occurred in the services that the school district should have supplied in the first place. So it's basically making up for what's lost. And to place the child in the same position that he or she would have occupied, but for the district's violation of the IDEA. The student-specific educational benefits. Nancy, can we just stop for a minute? Is that noise coming from your computer or from mine?
Okay, we just had a little glitch, technical glitch, but now we're back with you. Go ahead, John. Talk to us about those considerations.
Okay, thanks. So the considerations include the duration that the FAPE was not in place, and exactly what services there were that weren't delivered, and how you can place the child in the same position that the child would have been in had FAPE not been denied. So it also involves some assessment of exactly what the deficits were resulting from the loss of FAPE and how you can compensate for that to best correct those deficits, what the services are that the student needs to basically elevate the student back to the position that he or she would have occupied without those failures of the district.
Wonderful. Now that's historically what Comp Ed is and how it plays out. We've had lots of questions from parents about, has anyone else weighed in on this? Has the US Department of Education? Are there new court cases? Has the Pennsylvania Department of Education? Now, court doesn't move quick enough for us to have any court cases on the matter yet. But what we do know is we have guidance from the US Department of Education, and they have said specifically that when schools do reopen, districts and charter schools must make an individualized determination whether and to what extent compensatory services may be needed. That needs to be consistent with any applicable requirements, including to make up for any skills that may have been lost. The Pennsylvania Department of Education has also provided guidance. They provided some really robust guidance on June 30th about Comp Ed. They expressly recognize that children with disabilities may require comp ed and compensatory services due to this move to virtual instruction. They said that as children with disabilities are particularly affected by the loss of in-person instruction, PDE ordered school districts to take steps promptly upon the return of in-person instruction to assess the needs of children for compensatory services. What that means is that school districts need to gather baseline data regarding each student's current educational levels and compare that data to the progress monitoring from last school year. Then they can begin to provide what PDE refers to as recoupment services to affected students, track the progress of each student receiving those recoupment services, and within 3 months, review progress, if any, of the student by using multiple data sources and determining the extent to which the student has not achieved meaningful progress or lost skills despite those recoupment efforts. The school district and the parents, together as the IEP team, must then determine the level of compensatory services which should be offered and how those services will be provided. This analysis about compensatory services and comp ed during the period of virtual instruction is to be separate from any meaningful educational concerns prior to the pandemic. So children with disabilities who failed to make meaningful educational progress before schools shut down may be entitled to compensatory education services related to issues which arose before the pandemic. So this distinct question really involves a completely separate legal analysis, which is based upon well-settled and frequently litigated principles that are completely separate from our spring 2020 move to virtual instruction.
Right. Yeah, Nancy, before you move on, I actually have a question for you here. What should parents do you think, to sort of document what's been going on so as to help be part of that team when it's time to evaluate what the effect was on their students?
Sure. So the best thing for parents to do is to keep track of data. And when I say that, sometimes I think it sounds like a very formal process or there has to be a form, but that's not a case. For some parents that I work with, that means they just have a little notebook that they keep in their kitchen, and at the end of the day, they write down, perhaps it's a student with speech and language articulation issues. And they say, oh, this week I've really noticed that Susanna's regressed on her R articulation. Or this week, Joseph was supposed to get 3 occupational therapy sessions, and because of computer issues, he only got 1. So it's as easy as your own parental observations of your child, both of skills that are regressing or progressing, and also of any sort of missed specific services or appointments. I have one client who keeps track of it on a dry erase board on her refrigerator. And when the dry erase board gets full, she takes a picture with her cell phone and emails that to herself.
Perfect.
So there's lots of creative solutions. What's important for parents is don't let perfect be the enemy of good enough. Just, you are the expert on your child. You know what's going on in your home and with your student. So just keep track of that information, however works best for you, so that you can share it at the IEP team meeting.
Right.
Another question that comes up is whether or not parents should sign a waiver with regard to either FAPE or an IEP or timelines. I want to encourage any parents watching this to be really careful not to execute any waiver of the right to comp ed, which says it addresses the move to virtual instruction, but also eliminates the rights to comp ed prior to that time. You want to make sure that a prior written notice or a notice of recommended educational placement, we usually call that a NORUP in Pennsylvania, that when you receive that, it indicates that the plan for distance learning is a temporary interim plan and that your student's program will revert back to the last IEP when your student goes back to an in-person school. You want to make sure you're on the lookout for any indication that the district regards your agreement to that NORUP or IEP as a waiver of your child's right to FAPE. If you see anything concerning along those lines, but you want to move forward with implementing the distance learning plan or receiving some sort of distance learning services during this time as we're reintroducing children back to school, sign the document and write near your signature, "I agree to the implementation of this distance learning plan, but not to its appropriateness."
Exactly.
A few other considerations for parents to consider throughout the process of assessing Comp Ed is really, as the process unfolds, parents just be alert to the rights of your student to compensatory education both before and during the pandemic, and recognize that there are lots of alternatives that exist to receive proper and complete compensatory education services.
So what would some of those basically alternatives be, or what would compensatory education look like or be used for, essentially?
Sure. So sometimes compensatory education means that the school itself is going to agree to provide additional services outside of what would already be required by the IEP for the student to receive FAPE. Other times it means that the school is going to pay some outside provider to provide services. It may also mean that an amount of money, a compensatory education fund, is set up where parents can contract for services and programs and maybe assistive technology for their student that are appropriately covered by the Comp Ed fund, and then be able to apply for reimbursement. We have clients receiving a variety of compensatory services or using Comp Ed funds in a variety of ways. Some things that are frequently used for are things like tutoring, executive functioning coaching, social skills groups, counseling, those sorts of things. But I really encourage parents, students, and the districts we work with. I typically see, to look for creative solutions outside the box to make sure that students' needs are being met and that their compensatory education funds or hours are being used really to help the student get back.
Right. So in what you've just said, I think it really kind of maps out that this fund, it is a fund of money, but it really can only be used for specific things, and that's why we're talking about it compensating for what's lost, and so it has to be within that kind of box, within those boundaries, and it's not just money that the parents can take and use for whatever they want. So in that way, it's not punitive. It's not any way of punishing the district. It's a way of making up for what's lost. But I think that to some extent, I know it differs state to state, but in Pennsylvania, I think that typically what I have seen anyway is that it goes into a fund, and then there are different ways of structuring the way that fund can be used exactly depending on the circumstances of the child. Everything is individualized here too, right?
Absolutely. The most important thing to always remember is that whatever we're doing when it comes to students with disabilities, whether they have an IEP under the IDEA or they have a Section 504 plan, is that we're always talking about individualized solutions for individual students. We would not want to see a school come out and say all students last year who should have received speech and language services are going to get an extra hour a week this year, and that's going to be Comp Ed. That's not individualized. We want to make sure that students are getting what they need and what they're legally entitled to, but that's also a more efficient and effective use of public resources to have these individualized determinations.
Right, and one of the reasons it's more efficient, I think, is that doing something like what you just mentioned in your hypothetical gets in the way of whatever would otherwise be going on during the school day, right? So it's basically getting in the way of their making progress. It's really not adding anything back.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Really, it's not supposed to supplant what's going on, and it's not supposed to be offered in lieu of the FAPE that the child should be getting right now. Your child is still entitled to the FAPE that they're supposed to be getting, in addition to the compensatory education.
Right. So I think that pretty much wraps it up for what we wanted to talk about today.
It does.
If,
And I really enjoyed spending this time with you, John,
yes,
across the
likewise.
state. I think that's, I often say that McAndrews, while we have offices across Pennsylvania and Delaware and the Metropolitan Washington, D.C. office, we almost operate as one office with really long hallways. So
Exactly.
when we work with clients and those of us working here, we really get the benefit of our full team and all the different kinds of expertise that we provide.
Yeah.
I do just want to remind everyone that, as always, our special education department provides free consultations to parents of children with disabilities, and the vast majority of our cases are handled without a retainer or parents paying any sort of hourly fee.
That's absolutely right. And if I could just add in, that's because it's a civil right. It's an entitlement, a federal entitlement, and it comes with an entitlement to attorney's fees if you prevail in showing that the entitlement was deprived, that your child was deprived of the entitlement. And so that's really how it works. And yes, absolutely, we're always available. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact us.
And I'll just leave you parents with 2 tips. If you only remember 2 things that we talked about today. Number 1, be careful if you're signing a waiver that you're not waiving all comp ed or all issues prior to COVID, because you don't want to be giving all of that up necessarily. There may be situations when you do, but be very careful with the waivers. And number 2, any compensatory solution for your child should be individualized for your child.
100%. Thank you.
All right. Wonderful. Thanks so much to John for joining me. Thanks to everyone who's viewing this and visiting our YouTube page. Again, I encourage you, we have an entire series on issues that have arisen during COVID that I hope you'll check out. You can always reach our office by email, by phone. In our Pittsburgh office, if you need the number, it's 412-313-5510. Our Berwyn office, where John is 610-648-9300.
Yes.
We hope this was helpful, and thank you so much for joining.
Absolutely. And check out the articles on our website. They're great parent resources. Take care.
Absolutely. Bye.